Today we are on day two of our Parents of Teens. We're using the Parents of Teens Katthe deck questions, and the focus of today is relationships, relationships, relationships. Renee, you're going to want to adjust your chat to hi from Modesto, but you're going to want to adjust your chat so everybody can see it. It should be the second on the drop-down menu. The first one says panelists, the second one says panelists and attendees. And that way everybody can see that you're here. Perfect. Okay, so housekeeping, ways to engage. Primary way is the chat, which is why I keep focusing and harping on that panelists and attendees. The second way is you can raise your hand, and Andrew, who's here from Be Strong Families, will unmute you. You'll unmute yourself and you'll be able to speak. And it's always wonderful to hear people's actual voices, and you can say a little more when you're talking than you can sometimes when you're writing. So I encourage you to raise your hand. Next slide. In recognition that we co-create this safe space together, we have agreements. Be Strong Family has agreements for everything we do. So if you can agree that during this half an hour, you'll speak from your own experience, you'll treat other people the way you want to be treated, you'll be here now, and if you need a minute, you'll take a minute. Just do what people are doing in the chat and write, I agree. That's the warm-up. Awesome. Okay, let's get started, Andrew, with our first set of questions. And again, these questions come from our Parents of Teens and Emerging Adults Parent Katthe deck. And the impetus for that deck, it's a brainchild of mine from when I had a teen emerging adult, and I was like, there's a lot of support for parents when they're parenting young kids, but it really gets tough when you're parenting teens, because there's so much more stigma attached to their behavior, or you feel responsible for their behavior. Like, kids don't come with a manual, but when they get to be teenagers, you've been with them for whatever, as old as they are, and it's just kind of tough to navigate those issues. At the same time, it's harder to talk about it with people. So that's what we created this Parents of Teens deck, so to get parents talking with each other about what you do with these teens and emerging adults. So the question here is, what do you do when you don't like the friends your teen or emerging adult is hanging out with? And how do you offer guidance or suggestions without getting into a power struggle? So what do you do when you don't like the friends your teen or emerging adult is hanging out with? How do you offer guidance or suggestions without getting into a power struggle? Because we all know, like, if your child comes home with a boyfriend that you don't approve of and you express your displeasure, often that's just gonna push her closer to him or push him closer to her. So how do you have those conversations with your teen or emerging adult about their friends? Adrian says you pick your battles wisely. Try to get them into another different sport or activity or job. That's a great idea, Adrian. I mean, just that you're kind of changing the activities, then you're changing the people that your child is interacting with. Feel free to raise your hand and I can unmute you so you can answer these questions. That's what Andrew says, for sure. Trying to remember, it's been a little while. Brenda says, I ask them what they like and don't like about the person. We talk about the friends. There's times I've been wrong about them. Nice. Vera, you have your hand raised? Let's see if Vera.
Hello?
Questions. Okay, good, Vera. Yes.
Hi. What I usually do is I usually tell my children the friend or he or she chooses who he wants to hang out with, and I don't approve. I always say that I don't approve of his or her behavior and the things that he or she is doing, and I'd like you to make sure that you don't follow whatever they're doing, that whatever wrongdoings that they have, that when you're with your friend, that you understand that right from wrong, and that if your friend is doing something wrong, do not follow, walk away. Um, I think it's best that they learn that way, that they learn to adjust, um, because if we try to remove them, it's a battle. And then I want them to see for themselves what I'm trying to say to them, that their friend may not be a good choice. And I always say, your friend may not be a good choice, and I may not bother, or I may not approve of your friend, but it's your decision. And I just hope that you don't get yourself into any trouble or any issues with your friend. So I usually try to get them to to see for themselves and
Nice.
make decisions on their own.
Thank you, Vera. Thank you for raising your hand, and thank you for your wise counsel. And I think we're hearing a lot of support for Vera's approach in the chat. Taquana says, by asking questions, etc., what attracts you to this person? How does this person make you feel? And Rebecca says, I invite them to my home so I can get to know them. And Ashley says, I try to be mindful. Just because I don't like them doesn't mean they don't bring my child joy. However, it's a safety issue that's always addressed. And Renee says, I talk with my teen and young adult about what their friends do and ask if they do them too and what they think about the friends. They usually figure it out on their own. Also talk about their goals and if that friend is encouraging them towards those goals or discouraging them. And Adrian says, I talk about supportive and uplifting friendships. I never discuss their friends by name unless they bring it up. And Tammy says, it depended on their ages. I tried to talk to my girls about why they like that person, express my concerns and ask them to be cautious and remember who my girls are, and what their values are. Remind them not to lose themselves in it. Now that they're older, I'm not as comfortable voicing my concerns. I always tell them they're smart women and I trust them to make good decisions. And Deborah, who needs to, you need to put panelists and attendees because other people can't see except for me, but I'll read what you wrote. Deborah says, I explain to my children that they know right from wrong and they have choices. And I remember some of the most concerning friendships for me when my son was younger were those where I felt like he was being taken advantage of or exploited, by the person. Like, it wasn't even that they were going to lead him into bad behavior as much as I thought that they were not treating him well. And so those were difficult conversations. I'm not sure, I can't even remember how they ended up, but they were difficult conversations. Dana, you want to put yourself to panelists and attendees? But Dana says, I always ask them over to get a feel for them. I talk to them about our rules are our rules for a reason. Other families have other rules. I do not bend our rules for others at our home. I've been very lucky that all my kids' friends have liked me, so it's been easy to integrate them into our life. I always talk to them about how everyone has their own road. We don't have to follow another's road, but we can always come alongside them to be there as a friend. And Adrian has her hand raised. So Adrian, would you like to speak? Nice. We can even see Adrian. That's cool. You need to unmute yourself, Adrian. We can't hear you yet.
And video.
Okay.
Okay, give me a second here. It's saying it. Oh, it doesn't want my video. Okay, fine. I just want everyone to be very cautious when working with other children because you never know what's going to happen several years down the line. And just like your child's going through a rough moment, the other child is as well. And you have to remember to be supportive and helpful because I have a real interesting situation. I have an 18-year-old and a 21-year-old, and my 21-year-old is dating somebody. And that person used to be my 18-year-old's friend when he was a freshman in high school. And he led my 18-year-old down a very bad path. But now, in recovery and doing really well, he's in a fantastic supportive relationship with my 21-year-old. And my 18-year-old is also just fine, and everybody's in college and doing the right things, on the right path. And so I feel that if I hadn't not use judgment, you know, and if I hadn't continued along sort of the same paths that you're trying to bring up here, Katthe, and this is wonderful, by the way. I can't tell you how fabulous this is, that I wouldn't be where I am now, where both of my children can be uplifted and supported, because I would be judgmental. I would be negative and maybe feeling unable to communicate with both children and their respective relationships. Instead, I'm really focusing on them and I'm letting them lead. If one of them doesn't want to be part of a, you know, family dinner because whatever, I just let them do their thing and I have dinner with the other couple. And I let it be. And it's built relationships under some pretty strict COVID rules here in Los Angeles. So I'm happy and satisfied, and I just wanted to remind everybody that the point of living is to bring joy and happiness to everyone. So be very careful with your decision making, and just remember that they will grow up and become adults, and hopefully they'll be better people because of their experiences young as young people.
I also remember, I'll always remember, and I think I was very young when my mom said this to me, but she said, you know, we know that you're going to do things as you grow up that we don't approve of. And we just hope that you will think about the consequences and not do anything that will permanently affect you negatively. And I got it. Like, I got that, and I carried it with me through my whole adolescence. You know, everyone has their own journey, Deborah says. Yeah, everyone does have their own journey. And that was also a really important thing for me with my son as well, is like realizing that it was his journey, it wasn't mine. And so that I could try to, I think the best metaphor for me with teenagers was driving, you know, teaching them to drive, where you have to sit in the passenger seat. And if you freak out or you get overbearing, you're actually causing danger. You know, your child is more likely to run into something, more likely. The best thing that you can do when you're teaching your teen to drive is be very calm and assist them with seeing things when you do, because if you've been driving longer, you're looking further ahead than they are. So to say, I would say, Megstab, there's a red light up there. Are you seeing it? You know, like, but very calmly. And I think it was a great metaphor for, you know, letting them drive because it's their life and they've got to figure it out, but also being able to give my counsel. And Dana says, we have had some challenges where friends were let go of due to something or another, and we discuss what happened and how that translated to how they feel about themselves and others. It always leads to conversations about healthy boundaries. I tell my girls to be the kind of friend they want to have. Beautiful. And we all try new things and act out to some extent. I think that's very important. I always think of that in terms of bullies. Like, everybody always talks about bullies as if like they're a totally different species. But the thing is that bully is someone's child as well, you know, and there's a continuum. And have we ever been bullying? You know, have we ever been unkind to someone? Have we ever, you know, so I think that's also important too, is in the grace and the forgiveness. And I loved when, Adrian, you were talking about, you know, just how things do change over time and being willing to flow with that. And our next question is, how do you model being a good judge of character? That's another question in our deck. How do you model being a good judge of character? I think the subtext behind this is that your kids are watching your friends. Your kids are watching how you interact with other people and what you put up with and what you don't put up with, and how you let go of or distance yourself from other people. Does anybody have a story about this that they'd be willing to share? That would be raising your hand. A story about your child watching you navigate difficult relationships, or a child watching you make a decision about someone's character. It's very quiet in the chat. Two hands now. We got two hands. Let's who's first? Dana first? Awesome.
Good afternoon.
Hi, Dana.
Hi there. I would say probably the biggest, most impactful part that has been really beneficial to me and my girls is in the process of the divorce. Instead of hiding all of the difficulties that I had in communicating with their dad and the challenges that he brought to that relationship, instead of hiding them and trying to make them seem like they're not as big of a deal as they are, I talk really openly and honestly with my kids. But I'm really thankful I do not have any hostility or negativity towards my ex-husband. And so I'm able to sit down and talk with girls about specific behaviors. And so when something happens, it's like, okay, let's talk about this. If he shows up at an event he wasn't invited to, how do you girls feel about that? Do you want to walk in? Are you comfortable with that? Do you want to not walk in? How are we going to approach that and be safe for ourselves and our own personal boundaries and enjoy the experience of what we were doing? And it has led to some amazing conversations. And what I realized is, even in the context of your own family unit, you do not have to, even in particularly in a healthy relationship, quite honestly, but you do not have to bow down to or cower to or put yourself lower than another person in any relationship, including your spouse, including your children. And I think it's been really important to point out what's acceptable behavior and what's not acceptable for you, and that everybody has to kind of come up with that boundary for themselves. And so the way I explain it to my girls is I say, look, you have a house, it has a lovely yard, and you have a fence. It is your job to put up the fence at the distance where you need it. Some people's fence is going to be a mile away from their front door. Some people's fence is going to be 10 feet from their front door. And everybody has to be okay with where their fence is. And it's your job to see who comes through that gate and who doesn't.
Yes.
And not every person that walks by is deserving of coming through that gate.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's constantly a balance of, how did this person interact with you? And I do it with their friends all the time. It's like, how did you feel after that? Did you have a great time? You didn't? Okay, let's talk about what happened that you didn't have a great time. And so just being really, really open with those conversations without being overly negative has been hugely impactful for us.
Thank you, Dana. And Renee also says, I don't want to go into detail, but this applies to toxic family members or family members who are behaving in a toxic way as well. Adrienne says she tends to do that without involving her children. And I really resonate with what you were saying, Dana. Everybody knows I've been divorced as well. And I remember that my son said, I don't understand. I can get along with both of you. Why can't you get along with each other? And I was very honest. And I said, I understand that would be ideal. And I've really tried. But I can't. And I need to, I felt like I needed to say, like, when the dynamic gets to be like this, you have to leave. You know that when you've tried everything you can and it's still not positive and nourishing and nurturing and loving, and then that's the time to let go. Adrienne says, upon listening and reflection, I do something similar with my family and toxic behavior. Thank you. And Takwana, are you ready to speak? Takwana. You need to unmute.
Yes. So I resonate with what Dana was saying as well. But I know for me, I think just modeling I know as my teenager now, who is a young adult, you know, she reflected back on um, what she saw growing up as a single parent raising a child. And she thanked me for modeling, you know, just being able to see how I handle like toxic relationships and or healthy relationships. And she was able to communicate that with me. Like I said, going into her adulthood of uh, different people she chooses to be around. So I know you know, sometimes we don't always think that our children are watching and watching things as they're younger and in their teenage years. But when she was able to sit down with me when she turned 19 and just reflect back on what she had saw growing up and the choices she are making now, that just, you know, made me feel good as a parent.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing that. And Dana says, like, I think Dana's also reflecting on what you're saying by saying, I think the key is recognizing it within your family and then extending that outward to family and friends. Like, what is appropriate behavior? How do we deal with inappropriate behavior? And then Adrian says there's a big difference between under 18 and older than 18 as well. Next, let's go to the next question, Andrew. So the next question is, oh, this is the same. How do you model having good boundaries and not being dominated, controlled, or abused in a romantic relationship? And we were kind of touching on that, I think. I mean, just recognizing that our children are going to have romantic relationships, and we don't want them to be dominated, controlled, or abused in those relationships, right? So how do we model that in our intimate relationships? And then what's the next question, Andrew? And how do you talk to your teen or emerging adult about making good choices about sex and intimacy? So it's modeling, and then it's also talking to your teen or emerging adult about these kinds of relationships. Dana says, with the current generation, it's really important to discuss the words they're using. Things don't mean the same across generations. Yeah, and like hookup culture, right? and what people, I mean, I guess I read a book recently that was a survey of girls. I'm forgetting the author, maybe somebody knows it. It was a couple years ago that it came out, but she had surveyed girls about romantic relationships, and it was very surprising, you know, for me as a feminist and someone who, you know, had thought a lot about, you know, what that girls were putting up with as much as that they weren't expecting that they should be satisfied in a sexual relationship, that they were putting up with, just by the survey, that they were putting up with a lot of things that we learned, you know, in my time, that we were clear about. I wish I could remember the name of that. I'm going to look for it. Brenda says, demand the kind of respect you deserve and return that respect. What else? Peggy Orenstein, I thought that's who it was. And it's called Girls and Sex, Navigating the Complicated New Landscape. I recommend that. We'll put it in the chat. This is interesting because we're in a really small space. What do you mean, Adrian? Like you're in a really small space, you know, physically in your home, or? And Tammy says, I think the answer to this could vary greatly depending on the situation. If one is living in a situation already, it may be harder. Everyone gets to the point of ending abusive relationships in their own time. It's hard to model for your kids if you're stuck in it. With the controlling and gaslighting and feeling like you have to walk on eggshells, a person may not be in the frame of mind to model healthy boundaries, etc., for their kids. Very true, Tammy. And Ashley says, my husband and I try to set an example by not arguing in front of our daughter. We always, even when mad, don't talk down to one another. We remind her that even when you are mad, you don't withdraw love. And Adrian says, yes, and I just don't, in a small space, and I just don't want to see PDA or hearing sex behind closed doors, right? Yeah. So it's very true, you know, that if you're in the middle of a relationship that's very difficult. That's what I was saying also, that it was, I thought the best thing I could do was say, when it gets like this, it's time to leave, you know, instead of, and Dana says, I tell my kids that their virginity is a gift they can give only once, and they should make sure the person they're willing to give it to respects and honors that gift. And Adrian's making sure everybody knows she's not a prude. Yeah, I get it, Adrian, but even if you're not a prude, you don't necessarily want to see people making out in your home. And Renee says, I have boys, so I always taught them early on to respect the opposite sex. Also had early conversations with them about sex and what the outcomes could be depending on their choices. I taught them they don't need to do everything now, as they would not have anything to look forward to. Both my 17-year-old and 20-year-old have girlfriends now, and they're great partners. Nice. It's nice to raise great partners. Boys who are great partners. All right, we might have time for one more question. Let's go to the next question. What have you learned about positive relationships from your teen or emerging adult? What have you learned about positive relationships from your teen or emerging adult? I guess what I've learned from my son is forgiveness, and I'm constantly, he gets angry and he walks away from things or puts distance in there, but you know, when things are not going well, but he has a long view of things. And when that person apologizes, or when that person gets into a better situation, he's very understanding and very forgiving of people's foibles, and continues, you know, okay, so if he has a friend who's got really bad substance abuse problems and is behaving very negatively because of that, he will cut off the friendship for a while. But when the friend is in rehab or is in recovery, he'll show up and be supportive. I think he has a lot of compassion in relationships, and a lot of forgiveness. So what have you learned about positive relationships from your teen or emerging adult? Dana says, it takes a lot of work. My girls are quick to cut and run, so I'm working with them on understanding and being willing to see both sides of the point. But what strengths do you see? Maybe another way of asking this question is, what strengths do you see in your children that you may not even have yourself in the way that they relate to others? Resiliency, nice. So we're running out of time now, but I think that's a good question to leave you with, and to leave you with watching. Grateful that both children's relationships are positive. Nice, Adrian. I just think it's like, just to watch your children and just be grateful and appreciative of the strengths that they have in relationship that might be difficult for you. Renee says, my friends are very equal in their relationships with their partners. Very nice. So tomorrow we have, tomorrow we have adolescent development and what it all means for parenting. Sarita and I are splitting up as parents of teens conversation moderation. And then I'm going to be here on Thursday and getting ready to launch. And Friday we have parents of teens and emerging adults cafe. And then Monday, maintaining a positive relationship with your teen or emerging adults. And then we're going to transition to using the affirmation cards that Be Strong Families has on the protective factors. It's kind of living the protective factors, but we're going to be using the affirmation cards as the basis for the conversations instead of the cafe decks. So looking forward to seeing you at an upcoming at an upcoming webinar, upcoming conversation. And next slide, Andrew. Is there another slide? Oh, okay. I thought we were going to have a picture of the Teens and Emerging Adults Cafe deck, because all of these conversation questions are in that deck. So for being able to talk to your friends or being able to use in your cafes, we put the link in the chat. So we will see you tomorrow or whenever you can come next time. Thoughtful dialogue. I agree, Dana. You all are awesome. We appreciate you. Thank you for coming.